Right, the chapter 20 is a chapter about verbal roots and other forms of the future. This is there's a lot of morphology here, how words are put together and how they change. As I said, Dr. Mounce is very good at this, and he does give you some good tips about how to go about recognizing and learning these things. I would say to you the primary thing you want to do in the first part of the chapter up to the halftime review is read this very carefully and make sure you may really need to read it more than one time, but then you will want to remember where it is. What he's doing is talking about the four patterns that he had referred to earlier, and so you'll want to take a look at those and see what they are. Pattern one is I guess we would call the one that we're most familiar with, and then the other patterns have different things which we'll mention in just a minute. I do want to mention the exegetical insight here. Dr. George Guthrie is a phenomenal Greek teacher at Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, and he's got some good insights. He's done a lot of work in Hebrews, and so I think you'll enjoy reading what he has to say here. I would recommend that you do that. Look again at your overview. Remember, those can be helpful in getting you started, so you'll know where you're going in that situation. The chapter, as I said, is a discussion of morphology, how words are formed or changed, and it is important. And so read it carefully and then remember where it is in case you run into questions about this and want to know where it is. Note the definitions in section 20.3. He talks about roots and stems. They are different, and he points out some really important things there that I would encourage you to note. And then the relationship of the verbal root and the present stem, and then the tense stem formed from the verbal root. So it's really the verbal root is what is important. He indicates in his lexicon the verbal root with an asterisk. So as you look at his lexicon, you may want to note that, and it will be helpful to you. So he talks about the root, the most basic form of the verb. He talks about the stem, what the verb looks like in certain tenses without the ending, for instance, the present stem, future stem, aorist stem, and so forth. So read carefully that section. Then he moves to the various patterns, and he shows you the difference in how these how the tenses are formed, comparing the present and future, and so you will want to read that very, very carefully as you go along. The pattern one, verbs that do not modify their root. Pattern two is verbs that have different roots. And examples of that would be the verb erkomai. Erk is the root, and then in the future it's elu. So it forms differently. And then you can look at all of those as he talks about it. Pattern three is liquid futures. Liquid verbs are verbs that whose stem end in lambda, mu, or rho, and they're going to do things a little bit differently as well. So read that carefully again, noting the footnotes and the things that go with it as well. He gives you some paradigms on the top of page 172 for the liquids, and that will be helpful to you as you look at them, both for the future active and the future middle. So pay close attention to that, if you will. And then the significance of the accents. The accents, and of course lengthen, the change in the vowel, lengthening of a vowel, are going to be keys to changes that have been made. So when you see that, you can kind of figure there has been some kind of change in the word, and you can start looking at that by looking it up in the lexicon and looking it up in his lexicon and seeing the principal parts, and also the find the stem for each tense, and the root of the verb as well that's there. And then he gives you a hint, and that so in 2019, read that. But what is very important in this chapter, as it always is, but it's especially so in this chapter, and that is the halftime review. You may want to copy that and put it in your notebook and keep it with you, because he talks about the root and how they form their tense stems and the patterns as he has talked about them. Talks about pattern 4 beginning in at 20.20, and he brings us back to the stops and double consonants and other things that are indicated in down through section 20.25. And he mentions compound verbs. That's simply a verb that is prefixed by a preposition. Read carefully what he says there, because there are a lot of them. I think Paul kind of made them up as he went along in his writing, and so you'll want to notice that. There are some things that you will learn as you go along about those compound verbs. Again, the summary is very important. Let it be a good test for you to make sure that you are getting that you're getting a grip on what is being talked about here. So I hope that'll be helpful. The master verb chart continues to grow, and I keep looking at it and putting it together and learning from it. The vocabulary begins on page 177, and then we'll come back to the assignments and the review for the weekly quiz in just a moment. But the vocabulary begins with apoktano or apoktano. I learned my first teacher pronounced the epsilon iota as I, and then from then on, every teacher I've had has pronounced it A, and I kind of do it both ways. And but I think it certainly is true that it's much more likely that it was pronounced like an eta than like an English I. So A would be, apoktano would be the best pronunciation. Then apostello, baptizo, gnosko, glossa, egero, ekbalo, eke, kreno, laos, meno, horao. The next one is Sophia, stoma, and sozo. Sozo is I save or deliver. All right. You will notice there are some previous words here and some advanced information that I encourage you to take a look at, and some of you may be motivated to spend a little bit more time with that, and I would encourage that if you are. Pardon me. All right, some final words. Do exercise 20 in the workbook, parsing the 10 words, and then translate sentences 1 through 10 as well. And then take a look in your PowerPoint at the review for the weekly quiz. You want to learn to recognize contract verbs, learn the vocabulary in Chapter 17, learn to write the primary, middle, passive endings. You'll have an opportunity to do that again, so be sure to be faithful to that. Learn to recognize and translate deponent verbs. Learn the vocabulary in Chapter 18. In Chapter 19, learn to write the future active indicative forms and the future middle indicative forms. Again, you'll have an opportunity to do that again and learn the vocabulary there. And then in Chapter 20, read that chapter very carefully and note the things that Dr. Mounce talks about, and then learn the vocabulary for the quiz that you'll be taking this week. All right, thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.